Hello everyone, and welcome to Snack Attack, our analysis of pandemic-fueled growth in the packaged foods industry. During today's session, we're going to look at how COVID has affected our eating habits and what that means for funders, founders, and investors too. And to help us answer these questions, we've put together an all-star panel that includes Darylle Johnson from Jab Publishing, Hannah Forbes from the funding crowd, Nick Saltarelli from Midday Squares, and our guest moderator for the day, Kate Grant from Fasken. A very warm welcome to all four of you. It's great to have you with us. One more little note from me before I hand over to Kate, just a reminder that this is an interactive session, so please do keep your questions coming in throughout and we will cover them as we go. But now I'm going to hand over to Kate to get us started. So when you're ready, take us away.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And I think Nick is just joining. I know he was having a couple of technical difficulties. So hi, everyone. I'm Kate. I'm with the team here at Fasken. I'll give you the 5-second overview of who we are, what we do. We're a full service law firm. I sit within something called our emerging technology practice group as a business advisor. So I'm actually not a lawyer. My background is in growing and scaling companies, and then also on the VC side. If you have legal questions, I'm not your person, but definitely reach out and we can connect you to the right person. So while we wait for Nick to come back, Darylle and Hannah, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourselves and then we can kind of jump into it.
Sure. Hey everyone, my name is Darylle. I am the co-founder of a company called Jab Publishing, which is something that I started in 2020 recently. We make games and books and things kind of circled around, well, they're inspired by mental wellness, but sort of take their own fun tracks. I'm also an investor both in the equity crowdfunding space and the public markets. I live here in Vancouver, BC, and I guess I'm kind of a lifelong entrepreneur, so a little bit of everything.
Hey everyone, I'm Hannah. I'm the founder of the Funding Crowd. We're a remote crowdfunding agency helping people raise on crowdfunding sites, including equity crowdfunding sites like FrontFundr, Republic, Crowdcube and Seeders here in the UK, and also rewards-based sites like Kickstarter and Indiegogo. Personally, I'm also just fascinated by equity crowdfunding, and I'm just finishing off a PhD in equity crowdfunding. And in general, just love crowdfunding and the space, and looking forward to talking more about how crowdfunding can be used to F&B businesses.
All right, Nick, last but certainly not least, if you want to give yourself an introduction.
I made it back in, everyone. I was having some technical difficulties, but we're good now. Hi, my name's Nick. I'm one of the founders at Midday Squares. We manufacture functional chocolate bars, and everybody always says, what does functional mean? It is basically high in fiber, high protein, fully plant-based, and we really developed a product to kill hunger. So it's to satiate that hunger cravings that you have from post lunch all the way to dinner. And that's like literally what my wife and I always needed in our life. So we're having a lot of fun building a chocolate company. And yeah, I'm here to give the entrepreneurial perspective for this conversation and see if I can add value to anybody listening that's going through the same stuff that we're going through.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. And we'll say functional chocolate bars, thumbs up. I think everyone on this panel is a fan of your product. So why don't we go ahead and jump right into it here. So since the pandemic started, we've really seen people's buying habits change when it comes to CPG brands. CPG, for those that don't know, stands for consumer packaged goods. We're aware more of our health than ever before, and we're just being a little bit more conscious of what we're putting in our bodies, what we eat. So I'm just wondering, from both a founder perspective, how has this changed the way that you're building your business? And for the investors on the call here, how has this affected how you're investing in CPG companies?
I feel like I'll jump in and start with the founder perspective. It's been probably one of the most challenging times to really navigate. We went from an environment where you were able to be in stores, promote the product, to not even allowing your product to be out of its package. So the whole landscape of product in people's mouths at store level has completely just been abolished, annihilated. Stores closed overnight. I think one of the biggest things, though, is that it's forced everybody to speed up the way that they approach consumers or work with fans in this day and age. And so, it's funny, like from 2000 to 2020, you can say that we were slowly entering the digital space, even though it felt quick. And then it's like 1 year, everybody had to be a company that interacted with consumers in many different ways, or else you were quote unquote screwed if you didn't have that way. And so I know on a brand side, all it's forced us to do is to like up the hell out of how we communicate with our fans, our customers. And to be honest, I don't know if we bring budgets back to the way we used to do stuff in stores because of how strong the return has been in terms of like devoting that one-to-one customer communication. And so the silver lining is that the animals got to have a break from all the humans in the world, but we also got to speed up our process of how we act as brands. And I think this is the new way of doing business. I think the world will be better off post-pandemic for all the changes that had to be made.
Yeah, I'll just jump in there to follow on from what Nick said. So I have a kind of a mix between an investor and a founder perspective, working very closely with founders on crowdfunding campaigns and also being an investor myself. And I'd say that I totally agree with Nick in his approach in the way that everything has changed, and this new approach to business actually being an amazing approach to business. And so to follow on from what I feel are the kind of big changes is firstly that inability to speak face to face with customers, partners, suppliers means that the companies that know how to communicate effectively online are the ones that are really coming out on top. And a brand I worked with, Nicks and Kicks in the UK, they spent several months before their crowdfunding campaign and before even pitching to investors, redoing their brand, thinking about their tone of voice, looking at their social media, and just doing a full refresh to ensure that they were coming across, promoting their brand online in the best way that they thought was possible. And it really worked out well for them. So that's one thing. And then also to stick with kind of Nicks and Kicks in this example, they focus and talked a lot about in investor meetings their resiliency with regards to their stockists and their sales channels. So they had a D2C arm to their business, but they also were in restaurants and supermarkets and service stations, and lots of different channels just meant that they were much more resilient to the pandemic. So I think the ability to communicate online and be authentic online was so fundamental during this period, and I think it will continue to be, and resiliency in all forms, but particularly in sales channels.
I'll keep mine brief here, but from an investor standpoint, I would say that the kind of health consumer packaged goods hasn't just started today because the pandemic has been happening for about a year. I think that this started, 3-4 years ago when it started to just slowly take off. And investors who kind of got in at that time got in at a great time if you got in with the right companies. I don't think it's too late, but I think now it's not so much about let's just go invest in any health food consumer packaged good company. Coming back to what Hannah and Nick are saying, it comes down to finding ones that have excellent branding, because that's what's going to have that stickability with the customers now, because the climate in the kind of health food space is getting, at least from what I understand, super saturated now. I see like vegan and plant-based stuff popping off the shelves all the time. I live in Vancouver though, so maybe it's different here, but that's my 2 cents.
I did want to add one more thing on the investor side. We did our Series B during the pandemic. One thing that I hope doesn't go away is we were able to knock out in some days 20 investor meetings because we were able to do it from our computer, right? Do I think that it needs to replace human to human connection? Absolutely not. But I think the preliminary conversations should never, especially when raising, we shouldn't have to be running around city to city to pitch in person as entrepreneurs. It was a huge help to be able to knock out, like I said, 20 meetings in one day without having to go from place to place to place. So yeah, I hope that stays.
Yeah, completely agree, Nick. And I think, in the old days, like 2 years ago, we used to, you get on the plane, you'd go spend a week in the Valley, you'd meet a bunch of people, you'd go spend a week in New York, meet a bunch of people. And I think we're slowly seeing that come to an end. Building on that note, we're finally coming to the end of this pandemic. Needles are going into arms. Everyone is starting to get vaccinated. Personally, I'm very excited to get vaccinated later this week. Just wondering, like, how will these CPG trends continue in kind of a post-pandemic world as we see things open up, as we see sort of a return to office spaces even? And, you know, looking at startups, for example, many of them, you know, you have the grab and go counters. If you've ever been inside Shopify, it's like literally they have a kitchen stocked with food. How will people continue to interact with these brands, and how will we continue to see sort of a shift in this marketing?
I think the companies that are finding ways to have a digital presence but also have a real world presence are going to be able to do really well. So Nick, you had mentioned earlier and before this call that doing like handwritten notes or notes to the customers, right? And finding a way to just stand apart from people who are just doing digital marketing, because I think that people want to be less and less and less on their computers after this last, year and a bit.
Transactional for me is always just been the worst form of marketing, and I think the Facebook era of marketing has really taken it to the polarization of transactional marketing versus relationship marketing. Like Kate, when I hear what you said is like, I think the truth is, and I'm going to cuss, so sorry, it actually doesn't fucking matter. Post-pandemic, pre-pandemic, what matters and will continue to matter always is how we interact with consumers. So there's commodity brands, which will always exist. And those, commodity brands, without ripping on any other specific brand, or brands that you find at a grocery store because you end up in a maze and you don't actually know, you grab it because it says something like interesting, keto or this or that, and you put it in your cupboard and you have no idea who it is. My mom has a ton of those in her cupboard. I think those will continue to be less valuable over time. By definition, scarcity is where value's at, and it's so hard to build real brands today. And so, for me as an entrepreneur and every entrepreneur, your one sole job, if you want to build tremendous value, in my opinion, for any shareholder, is to figure out how you break through commodity, how you become something that actually means something to people in any way, shape, or form. And that was true before the pandemic and will continue to be true after the pandemic. If you don't do those things, in my opinion, you lose. The days of commodity monster brands are over.
I won't add too much more because I think Darylle and Nick absolutely nailed it. I think the final point from me is brands that nail this blended approach. And by nail, I think there's just so many different things that come into that. But for me, a big thing is consistency of experience. So if someone can go to your website and buy their product and have an amazing experience, and then go to Instagram and view your content and have an amazing experience, and then going to local supermarket and get your product and love it, then I think that's what really differentiates a brand. So it's like experience, personalization, customization, all at scale and across all channels, I think can really allow you to stand out.
Hannah, you just hit something on the nail for me that like really is, if you are a brand, here's our definition, and you take your most bumping city where your customers are. So not all brands will necessarily have national, but let's say you have you take your top city. If you hold an event in that city and nobody shows up, you are not building brand equity. And so I think that's a really good gauge of, are you a commodity brand or are you a brand? And holding an event will give you a really good litmus test as to who you are on that spectrum.
How do you reckon people do that during pandemic times? Sorry, I'm not the host. I shouldn't have asked.
Touche. I mean, yeah, I don't think you could do it. So this is post-pandemic. Maybe
virtual events?
Yeah. I mean, those will never give you that true, getting up on a Saturday and showing up at an event is fucking dedication. That's where you need to see where your brand holds up.
Yeah, For sure. It reminds me of Majuri. So I live close to a Majuri store, and every Saturday they used to do free ear piercing. And they've obviously stopped it from the pandemic, but every Saturday morning I'd go for my run and there'd be a lineup of like 20 people in front of the Majuri store waiting to get their ears pierced. And I think it's kind of indicative of that notion that they've built a brand around it. They've built kind of a community presence. I think that's a really good segue actually into our next question, just around creating community. It used to be in the olden times, you know, you'd make a brand and then you'd build an ecosystem or a community around that brand. And now with social media platforms, think of Instagram, TikTok, even Facebook, we're more connected to people than ever before. And brands are more connected to their customers than ever before. So that idea has really been flipped on its head. Brands are now starting to build community even before they release a product into the market. How do you think you can actually build community and build authenticity into your brand so you're connecting with people on that level?
This is such a hard question, and I'm not surprised no one jumped to answer.
No pressure.
I think, yeah, I think a lot of the themes that have already kind of come out in this chat around authenticity and experience is the first thing. And one thing that I always tell people that are crowdfunding is that your focus should be providing value in all ways, and that should be your first interest. And if you do that genuinely well, and that is genuinely your main goal, to provide value to the people that follow you, to buy from you, to sign up to your mailing list, then I think the rest follows. What doesn't work is if your strategy is built around metrics, like we need to have this conversion and we're going to plug in these hashtags because that's what's performing better. Like, yes, those things are important, but they feel very much on the peripheries to me. The priority should be, okay, our Facebook followers love this type of content and they interact with this content and they love this content and it provides them value. So we're going to do more of this. And I think if you're doing that and you're really committed to providing value, that's how communities get built.
I'm going to sound super cheesy right now, but I'm just going to say it anyways. I think it's the same premise of like loving people or loved people, right? And getting your community involved where you love them and you involve them and you include them in the processes, whether it's something small or whether it's something large, and making them feel included and making them feel wanted in this thing that they're involved with. I think that goes a really, really long way, whether it's, you know, noticing that one of the customers has a cat and throwing a cat emoji at them in the comments. Like maybe you guys know Gary Vaynerchuk, he's talked for years about reply to everybody. Like nobody should go unresponded in the comment section. And I get that big brands would say, oh, that's not scalable. But I think what we're getting at here is this whole like balance sheet first and scalability first is not going to be the thing that prevails at the end of all of this. Times are definitely changing.
I could go deep on this piece. Darylle, you said so many things that I'm trying to just figure out where I even want to start with. For starters, I think there's no one way to build a really engaged community. I think that's been proven by so many different communities that there is actually no one way. From a content perspective, what I'm disappointed at in my peers and our industry as a whole is how generic a lot has become, how it's all meshed into almost one look. Because to Hannah's point is when you start driving algorithms, you start becoming homogeneous. You'll start to all look the same because you start reverse engineering that. I think a good algorithm that we used that was learned, we didn't come up with this, was every piece of thing that we put out for our community has to do one of the three things or multiple. Are we providing joy through what we're doing? Am I going to make you laugh? Am I going to make you have just a minute of enjoyment? That's one. Are we going to aspire? Are we going to make you aspire? Give you a feeling of wanting to push your boundaries is two. And then are we going to provide value in the form of knowledge is three. And anything that doesn't fall in that spectrum doesn't make it out. And so we had this awkward moment when we were going from what we were doing early to scaling to where we are now. There was this moment in between where we were following procedures of where we would put out photography on our website for the sake of putting that out because it was like filler content for that day. And I remember there was this moment where we sat, we're like, well, but why are we even doing this? What did it? And that's where that check mark came in, is that I'd rather post nothing or say nothing or send nothing than not hit one of those 3 triggers. And even though engagement at sometimes was a lot lower, over time, we've built a community. I think it's at 40,000 people that is real, that fucking will show up to those events. And even though it was slower, it was more meaningful and more impactful and did all those types of stuff. So I think, to like Hannah and Darylle's point, is that relentless obsession on value-added stewardship to your community is what will define the greats from the OKs.
I just wanted to add that, Nick, your passion for that is infectious. I don't think you could have said it better.
Yeah.
It's the truth.
Agree. I think, and you've done a really great job, Nick, on your social media and just building that brand and building that ecosystem around Midday Squares. I mean, I think the reason I originally heard of it is because people at our office were talking about it, and I was like, what is this thing? And then now I'm hooked. So,
well, I think the one piece I will say, though, not to forget, because this is a CPG talk, is if the product is not great, forget about all that stuff. So it starts with the product. Then once you have the great product, you need to layer in all that other jazz. But without that great product, don't matter how much you get people speaking about it, if the returns aren't there, you're screwed.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think, you see some people, anyone can pay a photographer to do, beautiful Instagram layouts or funky TikTok dances. But if the product isn't quality, then you're going to lose that customer base. So I'd like to take this moment just to remind people to, please throw some questions in the Q&A. Don't be shy. We're happy to have a chat and answer them. We do have one question that I actually think is timely right now. So someone is wondering, what are examples of some brands that are winning at pandemic marketing on social media? Specifically, any brands that are doing it on a smaller budget. And I think too, this is a really great question because there are a lot of people that are doing that startup entrepreneurship that maybe have just started their journey and don't have $1,000 to throw at a marketing campaign. So it would be great to kind of hear people's thoughts on that.
I have a couple that immediately come to mind. One is an F&B business, the other is not, but I think it's such a great example, and I know they both have quite small budgets. So the first is Canna Brew. It's this northern UK brewery that includes CBD in their beers, and they're in the UK, there's the reputation of being up north, being friendly, being soulful, having lots of heart, and that really comes through on their Instagram, and people really love that. So Canna Brew is one I definitely recommend. The other is a new fintech in the UK called Tred, T-R-E-D, and they're really good at being reactive. They get the memes out there regularly. Just all their content is really fun, really dynamic, and really engaging. So those are the two ones that come to mind for me.
Oh, I think we lost Nick again. That's okay. And I think too, just thinking, you mentioned Tred, which I also know. I think there is, when you are building community and ecosystem and that presence, it's less about pushing your product and more about what kind of ideology and audience you're talking to. So, yes, do your funky beer can, but also use memes, also use emojis, figure out who your audience is, and then talk to them. Because I think that, it definitely is something that will resonate with people, especially if you look at Gen Z versus millennials versus older generations who have more brand loyalty to various things. Oh, I think we might have Nick back. There we go.
I'm back. I did want to add, if we still have time on that question.
Yes, so the question there we go. What are some examples of brands that are winning at pandemic marketing on social media, specifically smaller brands with a smaller budget?
So yeah, so we didn't spend $1 on advertising up until our first $1 million of revenue. And what we were really scrappy on was a lot of relevancy to what was going on in the world. So like we played with a lot of fun content around relevancy of our demographic, of what was happening in the world. Putting out great content early on was a huge piece of breaking through. Now that required no budget. It literally required our iPhones. Now we've invested in greater content production, but when we first started, it was literally just my wife, my brother-in-law, and I with iPhones going. I think one thing that we always make a point to still to this day, I'll try to hit 100 videos in the DMs every day. So Jake will do 100, my wife will do. I try to communicate and have fun with our consumers and our fans through that ultra personal thing of sending video. And then sometimes we'll go back and forth a bunch of times. That's just stuff that like you don't need money to do, that builds a really, really, really epic crew and allows you to hear and listen and talk and just have a lot of fun. And then customer service was something that we turned in to. So we read the Zappos book, I think all of us at different points in our life, and we're really excited about that. And one of the key things that we've built the team to understand, and I think you could do this with no budget whatsoever, is anytime you have to get in a conversation with somebody that's interacting with your brand, you really have to open your mind to having two things: open heart. And what do I mean by that shit? I mean, like, you're going to mess up and people are going to be angry. But if you go into it with just that open heart and then wanting to really see if there's a way to make a learning from the conversations, that shit explodes. And that has been a piece that has allowed us to know what new flavor developments we were doing. We've been part of people's birthdays at family occasions because of those conversations. I've literally been on Zoom at somebody's dinner table for their birth. Like, there's just so much that you can do with no budget. It doesn't require Facebook ads, I think, really, especially until you scale that first $1 million. Like, you could get to $1 million of revenue without a single ad.
I think also to add to that, I think if you build a really good organic audience, then you're going to do ads better. Like when you know exactly what content, copy, audience works. And I don't think you can get really, like the best way to get a really good understanding of your audience is to scale organically. I think it means that ads and paid marketing are more effective later on.
Yeah, for sure. And I need to hear that story at some point about being at someone's dinner table on Zoom, Nick, because that sounds hilarious. Have another couple questions too. Any books that you folks recommend on this topic that you can kind of help guide the audience towards? I know that's something that entrepreneurs love, is reading when you get the time, but just curious. I know Nick, you mentioned the Zappos book. Personally, I really love April Dunford's book on brand positioning called Obviously Awesome. Highly recommend people read that. Any others to throw out there?
I'm just reading this book for the third time right now, Growth Hacker Marketing. It really comes down to not paying for acquisitions, but how can you kind of gamify acquisitions? How can you pull people in without buying people in? It's really, really short read, but super powerful. It's by Ryan Holiday. I love this book. Also, Ben Horowitz, What You Do Is Who You Are is another good one, but I'm a book nerd.
A really big hack for me in the FP&A that I've always done, if you want to almost get like millions of dollars worth of consultancy without spending the money, is to read all the food and beverage companies' 10Ks. So you go to this company called finviz.com, and you could search by market cap and segment by brewers, food and beverage, and all that. And I'm talking everybody, not just Hershey's, Mondelez, those companies. Just grab their 10Ks or their recent investor presentations. I spend a lot of time reading those, and they have fucking gold inside. Gold, 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 gold.
Awesome. Yeah, I think those are all great recommendations. And again, check out what your competitors are doing. Go download their investor reports. You know, do your due diligence, if you will. One more question on kind of branding and social media, and then I think we'll move on. But we're being asked as well is, how do you toe the line between being exciting and interactive as a brand with personality without kind of seeming artificial and, you know, call it fake? I think we see that a lot with, you know, the Instagram influencers a little bit, where they're like, oh yeah, I use this product, I totally use it, use my promo code, which it just seems inauthentic versus, you know, having a friend be like, I really love this thing, you should try it too. So I'd love to get people's opinions on that.
Can I start? There is a actress, I honestly forgot her name, but she was in an interview and somebody said, how did you never burn out? Because she just did so much. She was always in movies, always doing interviews. And she said, from the day that I stepped foot into this industry, I was always just myself. And I think that when, you know, we pick up the phone and we try to do an Instagram story or whatever, it's easy to want to present ourselves the way that we think that the world wants to see us, whether it's your personal account or whether it's a business account. And I think that when there's a congruence between who you are and how you present yourself as, not only do you not burn out so easily, but people see that, they feel that, they know when it's authentic and when it's real. When my partner and I started our business, we were dabbling between, do we want to do a vegan supplements company? Do we want to do an app? Do we want to do this or that? And he kept saying it has to have purpose. It has to come down to something that is going to make us want to keep putting one foot in front of another when shit gets hard, like real hard, because every business does. And I think that when that's your core foundation, is that you have the purpose, not just the passion, that same core is going to bleed through with your authenticity. And there's just going to be that congruence between everything that you do. And I don't think at that point you have to worry about being fake, because you're just being yourself. I guess the trouble would be scalability when you start getting employees on there and you start growing as a bigger company. But that comes down to culture and training, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's all about authenticity, and finding that in a tone of voice. That implementation of that authenticity is super hard, and it's actually something we discussed as a group in preparation for this panel, like how hard that is, and it definitely isn't something that happens overnight. But it's just about attention to detail and recognizing, actually, if we use this word, that actually feels more comfortable with me. So I think it starts as being quite visceral, like a very much a feeling. As Darylle said, like if you're about to post an Instagram story and you're feeling like this doesn't quite fit, it doesn't fit. That's like how you know. So I think committing to being authentic is how you ensure that everything comes across as authentic, as true to you.
Darylle summed it up perfectly for me. We actually have had that conversation deeply amongst our partnership. It's really easy to live a life when you don't have to live a double life. Like there's nothing that you can get blindsided by. You know, I think if you want to attract, to Darylle's point, if you want to attract authenticity, it starts with you as a brand being authentic. If you as a brand are not authentic, then you're going to attract that inauthentic crowd. And yeah, as a founder, I can't tell you how deeply everybody's going to try to break you on this. Investors are going to try to bake you. Your banks are going to try to, everybody will know better than you. And they're going to be in your ear and they're going to tell you, you can't do this, you can't say that, you can't be this person. And if you're going to go public, you need to look like this. And it's just block the fucking noise. That's the key to being authentic, is the blocking of the noise, in my opinion. Yeah, if you're a founder, it's going to be, it's hard. It's hard. The noise is there. Just remain true. Remain true.
Just to give an example of what Nick said there, Tread, who I was working with, we worked on the campaign with several other partners as well, some of which were kind of older, and the Tread founders are similar, like mid-20s. And the older people in the team were like, we don't like their Instagram, like, I don't like the memes, it all just feels like super unprofessional. And then I said, well, actually, I really like it, and I probably like all their Instagram posts every day, and I'm a Tread customer, and I'm a Tread investor, and all my friends are interested in Tread. And that's exactly it. Like you know your audience way better than anyone else, and don't be taking the opinions of people that don't understand your audience in the same way.
And this is philosophical. What does professional mean? What does that even really mean? Let's call it. As a group of people got together and decided that these were the boxes of what professionalism is. That's like defining isms. I fucking hate isms. Like, just do
It's like,
you.
who is the most the same? That's what we'll do.
Yeah. Yeah, 110%. And then even just to give you an example to Hannah's part. So my wife has always, been really on a battle of dealing with her body, speaking about it publicly. I'll let her have that piece, but she wanted to do a big piece of where she was going to do a journey with our audience. And she put out a piece on our Instagram. And I remember I got, calls from our investors being like, why are we putting this on the Instagram? And I'm like, I'm sorry, did anybody fucking ask your opinion? Because I'm not sure if you understand that this is our Instagram and this is how we communicate with our audience, and our audience is all that matters. It doesn't matter with people, and again, no offense to the investors on this call, because it's an ecosystem that requires each other. But the point is that if an audience is happy with a communication, it shouldn't fucking matter what an investor thinks about that level of communication, because ultimately you two parties want the same thing, which is brand growth, brand equity growth, value. And so it's hard. There's a lot of opinions, especially when you're trying to break the mold and do something that's different. You're going to have to Hannah's point, people are going to just not like it. And to that point, read Shoe Dog from Nike, the Vans book. I mean, go read all of those founders and you will see that true renegades don't give a fuck.
To add to that as well, Patagonia, let my people surf. That's such a good one as well.
It is a great one, actually. And I think that's all very good advice, and I always tell companies I work with on the investor side, I have an opinion. My opinion might not be the right opinion. So if it is, awesome. If it isn't, take it with a grain of salt. So let's shift away a little bit from the marketing conversation here, because I think it would be good just to talk about, getting that valuable shelf space, getting to the store. We're all starting to kind of go back out into the world a little bit. And as an emerging CPG brand, it can be really hard to get that shelf space. How can you build narrative and use it to your competitive advantage? And how can you really compete with those legacy brands or those commodity brands out there?
I'm happy to take this if nobody has anything.
Nick, this one's all you.
No, especially for when it comes to, it's funny because I was just having this conversation with a local beer company yesterday, who's a good friend of mine. Is I think a lot of the hard work today happens outside of the grocery store, and if you told me, like, Nick, gun to your head, you can only give one piece that will really change the way founders think about this, is stop approaching grocery stores as what they can do for you, but rather come up with how you drive value to the grocery store. So early on, what we would do is we would go to our Instagram audience, again, build your audience, because that's an army. And we would ask them, like, hey, who wants to see us in this grocer? We get people to vote on it. We would then take those votes, reach out to everybody individually, ask them if they were willing to bring in a form submission for the product. 9 out of 10 people are willing to do that, especially if they're into your brand. And so we would go to our buyers and we'd be like, listen, another thing is also we would keep track of our retail finder online. And anytime we would have hits in an area where we didn't have a store, we would approach the store and really try to explain to them that, we're going to drive customers here. We just need a place for them to come. So I think that narrative really needs to change. It's no longer, hey, put me on your shelf and do the work for me. I think a lot of our buyers want to understand how you as a brand are going to drive me, a consumer, that might not come to my store without you in this store. That is really the holy grail of selling. And that comes with work done outside of the grocery store. So literally all the work that you do that has nothing to do with the grocery store is how you get into a grocery store. It's super counterintuitive.
I don't know if this is too far left, but I'll just throw it in here. Like my company's preparing for a Kickstarter campaign right now, which is not equity crowdfunding, but another form of crowdfunding. And I'm in these groups, and I asked some questions, and one person said, there's no point even trying to build your social media presence online because all that matters is your Kickstarter campaign. And another person said, there's no point reaching through to distributors or consolidators or retail people right now because all that matters is that you have a successful Kickstarter campaign. Otherwise, those things are absolutely irrelevant. And I just thought this mentality was so backwards. I mean, when I go live with this campaign, I want to have an army of people who already, I'm sorry to bring this back to branding and marketing always, but that's going to be what drives people to the campaign. And that's going to be what is already the social proof before you even launch and go live. So I think it does come down to what are you bringing to the table so that these other people that typically do stuff for you can look at you and say, well, they have, they have a social following here, they have a social following there. We can see that they have things that are indicative that they're going to be successful, hopefully. So yeah, I agree. What can you do for them?
Yeah.
Abundance mindset of what you could do for them. I agree. We're too fucking privileged in this day and age to always think about what's in it for me. It's 110%. Just put it in your brain. What could you do for your customers or stores, and the rest will work itself out. You nailed it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. How can I help you? What can I do for you? How do we increase business revenues and, start driving more traffic? And I think that's something that we see really resonating with businesses is, yes, they can stock this, or they can stock something that's alternative that people are asking for and is driving demand and traffic to their stores. So I think those are really great points.
Perfect question, though. I do want to throw this to Hannah, though, because Hannah, you did your thesis on this. How many Kickstarters or crowdfunding campaigns are successful by just relying on the platform and not building their own audiences prior to starting?
Oh, it's very low. It's very low. So I actually have, I did a workshop this morning on this, and I have this graphic which shows like the Kickstarter bar. And you expect kind of 10 to 20% to be guaranteed. So these friends, family, super fans, they're going to back you, whatever, they're going to back you, great. Then 10 to 20% is the platform. Now that can vary significantly. Like if you make a big bang, you come into the campaign, you've got lots of people backing you, then you're going to be higher up on the platform. The search on the platform is going to be optimized, and that can increase. But in general, on average, you're looking at like 10% from the platform, 10 to 20% from the platform, which means that the vast majority, so between kind of 70 to 80%, are people that you connect with during your campaign or before your campaign that you bring into your campaign. So Darylle, I mean, you know this because you've already communicated the key knowledge on this, but it's absolutely so vital that you're bringing people to your campaign and not relying on the platform.
And I think to add to this point too, the reason why I brought this up is because when you look at a company who has millions of dollars, they have a large brand presence. It's one thing to say, what can we do for you, for the grocery stores? But then look at another company who, any given small startup who's trying to get in there and thinking, how in the world am I even going to get my first customers, let alone get on retail shelves? And Tony Robbins says it's not about having the resources, it's about being resourceful. So that's why I think that even for the small guys, any small companies, whether it be CPG or anything else, just thinking about how you can use these tactics to gain your audience, because that audience is going to be your leverage in order to help these other people, whether you're this big or this big.
And to go even further on that point, Gary Vee said, Hannah, is literally value is no longer money. Value is the communities. Like, so it is stacked in your advantage, the fact that you don't even need money to do these things. You can't even buy audiences.
Yeah.
And sorry to add, Kate, sorry, do you want to move on? I don't want to keep drilling down this point.
No, go for it.
So I think, and this is what both Darylle and Nick were saying, and we talked about it earlier in this conversation, it's like being yourself is like the best competitive advantage because no one else can replicate that. And a good example is that one of my friends runs a marketing agency, and she's quite small, she's just getting going. There's like 3 people in her team, but she's amazing and she does amazing campaigns. And she was pitching for a big contract, and she was going up against, like the last 2 was another big agency in the area that, you know, has big clients are well known for doing this kind of work. And she got the contract because she went in there and she said, like, we're small, yes, but that also means that you're going to be our biggest client. All our resources are going to be on you. We're out to prove ourselves versus being, you know, just another client to this big agency. So actually honing in on the fact that she is small, it like helped her win the contract. And I think it's, yeah, slaying in your lane, like knowing what you're good at, and using that to your advantage is, yeah, it's a superpower.
For sure. I think those are all great points. And I know we're almost at time here. So would love for folks just to share some kind of parting thoughts, parting wisdom. I think this has been really valuable for everyone in the audience, myself included, learning more about this space. So Hannah, if you want to kick it off.
Yeah, I think I'm just so passionate about brands that commit to authenticity. So I think if that's one thing to focus on, it's like, how can I be authentic online? And I think particularly in this environment, if you get that right, you're onto a winner.
Was it my turn? A takeaway? Nick, you gotta go first. I didn't think of one yet.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. I think one thing that I really, this is fascinating, and I kind of have to preach this like a relentless preacher, is a teacher back in the day. I was in a physics class and basically explained to me that it is physically impossible to have an unaverage outcome by giving the system average inputs. So what does that mean? He drew a y-axis, x-axis, y being the outcomes of people's decisions, and kept it very broad. And basically the x-axis, the different amount of people, right? So the different people on there. And he literally drew dots all over it, and then drew a line straight through that was basically the average. And then he drew all the dots that were on the outliers, so either above the line or below the line. And so he basically said, very simply, it is physically impossible to end up on the outside scopes by feeding it the average within it, because by definition, you would not be on those areas of the axis. And I can't promise you that you're going to be on the positive side or the negative side of the outcome. But what I could promise you is that if you feed it average inputs, you will only have an average outcome. But if you feed it unaverage inputs, you maximize your chance of an unaverage outcome. And in entrepreneurship, I think we're all trying to have unaverage outcomes. And so I ask you, before you make decisions, ask yourself, is this what the average decision that your peers would make or not? And really tease out the polar opposite of that decision. And then hopefully you'll find yourself as an outlier.
Okay, I got mine. I guess I'm kind of 50% entrepreneur, 50% investor, and I don't know how much this relates to this call today, but the one thing that I've always seen differently from a lot of people around me is how I perceive risk. And I think it's really important to be open to risk, because risk is what gets you to opportunities. Risk is what gets you on average outcomes. And I think that people look at risk as something that is inherently dangerous and inherently immature to do. But I think that calculated risk is necessary in order to expand your life in every way, whether it be entrepreneurship, investing, relationships, whatever. And I would just encourage everybody to look at risk differently, because if you don't take risks, you're not going to get towards the things that you achieve, at least not even remarkably as fast, remotely as close as fast.
Darylle, I think we're speaking the same language on a different dialect. Like, you're absolutely right. And I think risk needs to almost be dropped from the equation. That the word scares people, because it's risk. You hear it in life if, there's risk of death in something. So you start to apply like these really drastic things to the word risk, when really, like anything, to have you have to be fucking on average, to your point. Like, if you're going to apply the same risk profile, then you literally cannot expect to have a different outcome than your peers if you're all choosing the same path of resistance.
Well, It's like when you go to the bank and they're like, do you want a low risk, medium risk, or high risk account? And I'm like, probably the high one. That's just me. But I mean, that's literally directly correlated with the outcomes that they're projecting for you. If you go for the low risk account, you're likely going to get a low return. And I mean, maybe it's not the same for everything, but overall, I think that risk taking is, I think it's directly correlated with the outcome.
Yeah, I think that's all really great advice. And, you know, to sum it up, take risks, be the outlier. I like to take risks as well. So I think, you know, it's definitely got a correlation to seeing some sort of success and some sort of, you know, driving force. I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. We had some awesome questions from the audience. Darylle, Hannah, Nick, was lovely having you all here just talking about the CPG space. I think, you know, some really good takeaways. Nick, I also just noticed that it says uncensored behind you, which is hilarious. But yeah, I think thanks everyone for joining us and looking forward to hosting the next session. And thank you again to the FrontFundr team for having us here today.